Good day, everybody, and welcome to Noel Anderson's 15 Minutes of Fame, coming to you live from Sydney, Australia. Actually, I'm in my hotel room in the Great Western Hotel in beautiful downtown Central. I've got my cup of coffee here, and I want to talk about the reason I came to Sydney, because I came to Sydney on a little bit of a holiday, and I'm going to ask a question, which I hope to answer by the end of this podcast, which is, Sydney, did I change or did you? And I'm sure it's a question that many of us have asked when we've left the town we grew up in and ended up in a different city. And in that case, I've ended up down in Melbourne. When I've gone out in Melbourne and caught up with various people, they've always asked me, Noel, what about going back to Sydney? Now, I've always thought, no, I can't go back to Sydney because I'm getting a little bit too old now to start over again. And I'm sure anyone listening that's ever changed the location of where they grew up will know that every now and then you do have those thoughts about returning. So, this trip, I decided I'd come to Sydney and I'd just see, is there a possibility that I could go back? Or has the moment in life passed me by and I just have to suck it up and just deal with life in Melbourne? So that's what this podcast is about. It's about anyone out there who's feeling a little bit lost, who's not in the city they grew up in, and who is wondering if they should venture back to the place that they knew as a child and whether it still had something to offer them. Hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll have an idea what you should do. The first thing I noticed when I got off the Jetstar plane, after they charged me an extra $75 for extra luggage, it was a bit of a shock to the system. The first thing I noticed, though, was that Sydney was a little bit faster, a little bit funkier, a little bit groovier. Ultimately, it was banging its own drum, and it was banging it pretty loudly, as Sydney has always done. I was confronted by a totally renovated central station, and for the first part of being in Sydney, the first day or two, it did feel a little foreign to me. Even though I had grown up here as a kid and I'd lived good portions of my life here, it still felt a little foreign. And I was wondering what had happened. Had the world changed around me? Growing up in Sydney was not always an easy place to grow up, but on reflection, it was probably at the time the place to grow up in Australia. If you had to be anywhere in Australia, definitely through the 80s and 90s, then Sydney was the place to be. It had its own kind of beating heart. It was a little bit bohemian. There were lots of, left of centre people wandering around. Of course, the hard part about coming back is you have a lot of memories, and those memories come flooding back to you. I remember a time when I was very, very young that I went to my first nightclub in Sydney. My friend from school had taken me there, and it was a place at the back of Kellett Street, and it was a mixed gay straight bar, and it was called Costello's, and was in King's Cross. And I remember that being the first nightclub I ever went to. On a bit of a funny note, that particular night I went, and I hadn't told my family I was going, the place got raided by the Darlinghurst police, and of course I was thrown into a paddy wagon. Now, I was underage, remember? I was probably 17 years old, and I was shitting myself. I thought, this is not going to go down well. My mum is going to fucking kill me. And it did worry me sitting in the back of that paddy wagon. Anyway, this gay guy who was sitting beside me in the van said to me, "Mate, what are you so worried about? The cops just want their money." Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just telling the story, right? He said, "They'll drop us back off at the club soon. Just relax." Well, I sat in the back of that paddy wagon, dying, thinking to myself, if my mother has to come and pick me up from Darlinghurst police station, she is not going to be impressed. But as fate would have it, I wasn't locked up, and I was indeed driven back to the club and turfed out. And I can only assume debts were settled and everybody went back to dancing. And I, of course, jumped on the late train and headed home, my family none the wiser about my late night jaunt. Of course, the reason I came back to Sydney was to ask myself, would I move back? I've been in Melbourne 19 years and a lot of time has flown by. You just don't know if you've got it in you to start all over again. So walking around Sydney, I was trying to figure out Have my experiences over the last 19 years changed me as a person, or has Sydney changed? Walking down to Circular Quay, of course, any thoughts about your feelings or the life you've led just disappear. And looking at the Opera House and the bridge, I do get a sense of being at home and at ease with being here. But is this the place that I want to draw my last breath in? It's a place that I could come back and fit back in. Catching up with a few friends when I've been down here, I felt they were all pretty much doing the same sort of thing. And while there has been change in their life, it hasn't been huge upheavals like it is when you pack up and move to another city. I felt that they had had a very different journey than me, and that I had to rely on me and my ability to get through life without a lot of help from other people. And a lot of people I knew in Sydney had a partner tucked away. I mean, you reach out and you contact old friends, and obviously they're happy to see you, of course, but their life has also gone on, dealing with getting older and changes in their life as best they can. And when you've not been in a city for a long time, you start to feel like you're not part of the fabric of the city anymore. I'd lived away and have dropped in and out, but I was not part of the beat of the city. And 10 days somewhere isn't going to put you back into that beat again. It isn't going to happen. What I did discover, though, walking around the city, particularly of a night time, I did feel a lot of love in my heart for it as a place. But I realized that to call a place home, you have to have a connection that's closer than 19 years ago. You have to have connections that are a week ago, 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago. And when somebody asks me when I'm at a restaurant, Noel, would you ever return to Sydney? What should I tell them? And would we prosper by making that decision? And I'm starting to think that, yes, Sydney has changed, definitely. There are more buildings. It's more cosmopolitan. They've got light rail now. But there must be something in me that looks for change. And to go back 20 years later to anything, unless it's going to move you forward, is not a good idea. But there's an old saying, home is where the heart is. There's also another saying that you may have heard of. The ache for home lives in all of us, and it speaks of the longing we all feel for a space that truly belongs to us. There's this little story about home. A young woman moved to a bustling city far from the quiet town where she grew up. At first, she felt lost among the noise, the skyscrapers, the rush of people with places to be. She missed the creaky wooden floors of her childhood house, the smell of bread baking in her mother's kitchen. But one day, she found a tiny cafe that smelt like cinnamon and reminded her of her home. She started making friends, started hanging fairy lights in her apartment, and started laughing and laughing and laughing. And just like that, home wasn't a place she had left. It was something she was building moment by moment. Now, thinking back on that story, I realise, revisiting Sydney again, that home isn't just where you started. It's also where you ended up. So I guess next time a friend or someone in a cafe asks me, would I ever head back to Sydney? I guess I've got to say, you know what? I'm home in Melbourne, and that's good enough for me now. My name is Noel Anderson. You've been listening to Noel Anderson's 15 Minutes of Fame. If you like this, subscribe, and also remember to share the podcast. Oh, I thought I'd add a little PS to this podcast. I just got back from having dinner down at Darling Harbour, and something about the cool air and water at Darling Harbour brought back childhood memories. And of course, while I was eating my dinner, a rat ran right across in front of me, and I looked at that rat and I said to myself, Noel, you are home. Good night.